So if you talk with deaf people, right, you use American Sign Language, right? Gestures, the whole sign language, and there are different kinds of sign languages depending on which language you're speaking, right? There's different ones. And if you see someone who's deaf communicating, or if you see sign language at many of these politically correct events where you have somebody doing sign, and you watch simultaneously what they're gesturing, I mean, not only is it a beautiful dance, but it's much more expressive than just phonemes, that is, sound packages, right? But Bell wasn't down with ASL. He said, you deaf people need to speak because that's what normal people do. Okay, eugenics is about defining what's normal and imposing that upon people, and people who do not conform to normal, well, they're defective. We're not going to allow them to breed because it brings down the race. All right? So part of that, all right, he didn't believe in any kind of race mixing, and he basically believed that if you have, so deafness occurs in human populations at a more or less constant rate across all racial characteristics, right? So stopping a black person who's deaf and a white person who's deaf from having kids, the kids probably will not be deaf. Right? But in his time, he's thinking, oh, well, we're just going to create more deaf people by letting them have kids. This was the science, right? You've already seen how racist science existed. Oh, black people are crazy for wanting to escape slavery, so...
It doesn't seem like much of the science that ain't been proven. It seems like more of a theory, and they just roll with it.
Again, right, you're right. But again, they're taking this stuff seriously enough to form social policy. All right? And so eugenics is part of why Hitler is doing what he did with the Jews. Because Americans were doing that with Native Americans, he said. Because he's saying the superior white race conquered the red race, and this is what we're going to do with the Jews. Because they race mix. Polluting. I wish I was making this up.
That wasn't the real reason.
How?
It was because when they came back from World War I, they wouldn't let the Jews into the army. And when they came back, 60% of them were killed. The Jewish people had taken over the economy, and they hated that. That was the real reason.
I would imagine there are many real reasons.
That was the main reason.
Yeah. Somebody once told me, well, it was because Hitler didn't get into art school, and it was a Jewish guy that kept him from getting into art school, so it was revenge. Like, okay. You mean if Hitler had been encouraged to oil paint, he wouldn't have happened? I ain't buying that one, but okay, whatever.
Or look at his art.
Yeah.
He wasn't that good.
Yeah. All right, so the idea is, okay, so teaching two kinds of sign language by race to prevent race mixing of deaf populations. Basically, what could happen is the hearing could learn sign, because that's a more efficient language. You know, I'm watching that with my granddaughter. Signing ASL for babies. I mean, she's hearing, but more. Just as white people use limited signs to communicate with natives until they learned language, that is English, many natives already knew English. There was no how, he picked. I grew up on cowboy movies. So, complete solution. So that's one example, and we'll return to Alexander Graham Bell shortly, but so, complete solution to both heal the wounds from a community of suffering is also an activist organization to produce the change you want to see in the world. So what Gandhi say? Be the change you want to see in the world. And let justice flow like a mighty stream. So, the Niagara movement. This shows up on a midterm near you. You'll be ready. So the imagery, the Niagara movement, Niagara Falls. Du Bois and William Trotter, among others. The stiletto and the bludgeon. Stiletto is a short, sharp blade. Bludgeon is a club. You've seen Du Bois's work. You could see where he'd be cutting. And Trotter would basically, you all racist, boom, boom. Two different styles of leadership.
How did they get to the heels, stilettos? Or aren't those heels?
Yes, stiletto heels are basically after the knife. Don't trip on whether it's stripper shoes. Stiletto heels are basically, a stiletto is a long, sharp blade. And thin.
The stiletto heels with that
Yeah,
sharp,
right,
so tiny.
right. That's why they're called that. Long, sharp blade. Don't get hit with one. Right? So all those lynchings. So Du Bois and Trotter were both New Englanders. Truth is powerless as a force unless it too becomes a force. The force in part is the creation of a Negro intelligentsia. So intelligentsia basically is out of different philosophies, basically who's smart enough to lead. Now, how you select who's smart enough to lead is, well, people can select themselves, or you can set it up. So it has been noted in research that basically it's 3%, you need 3% of people of a given population to affect the change for the rest of the 97%. To start a trend, start a social movement. So to start this movement, you actually need people who select themselves to use their intelligence. So, the Niagara movement, Niagara Falls is mostly in Canada. Niagara movement has to happen in Canada because it's hard to get for a group of people of color to find a place to organize in America. Okay, we saw the problem that we had with Du Bois bringing Gandhi to America. So let's go over across the border where it's more better for us. Which means you basically have to have the money to go over there, which means being college educated or being able to write. So, on caste, so part of the thing with the problems that you can have with intelligentsia, having encountered this numerous times myself, when I write a paper, or actually a book, on how you deal with racism as an addiction, how do you recover from it? And somebody says, oh, well, that's too high level for the people on the street. I said, I'm sorry, I'm quoting black doctors. I'm quoting Du Bois. And I was taught to raise myself to their level by reading. Now, I could dumb it down, but maybe I shouldn't. Because they would say, no, don't. All of us should be raising ourselves to that level. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about. Du Bois says, I think I may say without boasting that the period from 1910 to 1930, I was a main factor in revolutionizing the attitude of the American Negro toward caste. My stinging hammer blows made Negroes aware of themselves, confident of their possibilities, and determined self-assertion. Meaning that you use your education and you educate yourself outside of a classroom. You do your own reading. and you read everything. Even though, especially, the philosophies of the racists who basically say, oh, well, you're inferior. Okay, well, what are you basing that on? Where is that coming from? Why are you believing that? So this is Lerone Bennett on Du Bois' cast. He was a proud, brown-skinned man in his middle 30s, a little below medium height, erect, sharp-eyed, and sharp-tongued, a reserved figure with chiseled features and a Van Dyke beard. He dressed carefully, carried himself and was never seen without gloves and a cane. He was a descendant of blacks, Frenchmen, and Dutchmen, but thank God, he reportedly said, no Anglo-Saxon. Okay. So, 29 African-American men meeting in Canada, then America, collaborate with white men to create the NAACP. Conceived as a global institution, global focused institution in light of the activities of their adversaries. So their adversaries are people like America and the crowned and otherwise heads of Europe, basically bent on global domination. So we have to basically operate on the same idea. So as an example going back. So the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, CP, colored people, is not just black people. It's people of color planet-wide. Their focus is global. So not just African Americans, people of color worldwide. That's the focus. Yeah.
The organization in Dark Princess, his novel.
Yeah.
That he was illustrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the protest.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Put up there with him.
So knowing your place. For example, so not everybody is of the same opinion. So knowing your place. The Negro problem, according to Booker T. Washington, Washington's place as he saw it, and White saw it, was, there's an old play, so I'm just giving you HNIC, head nigga in charge. Okay? He was conservative, obsequiously conciliatory. Obsequious is one of those fun words. Basically, it's like an Uncle Tom. You're not confrontational. You're deferent. If they're racist to your face, you just smile and go on. Conciliatory in his communications with presidents and captains of industry. And wielding certain illusory power. So, for example, if you read Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, okay, there's a character in there that's essentially like Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee Institute. And the principal character in The Invisible Man is basically trying to deal with this tension. So, wielding illusory power. So, and it's illusory power, it's an illusion, Washington's power, because yes, presidents and captains of industry raise you as an example. Okay, so you don't bring up race as an issue. You get along, and they say, see, now this is how you should be to the rest of us. Okay, when I basically was talking about O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was held up as a role model for the rest of us. Because he would never make an issue about race until, he started when he was in trouble. Right? So real power means you act to balance towards equality, not have to hire and fire power over black people. As a model for conservative black people who achieve a certain success and the trappings of success without challenging the structures that produce inequity, here's where the problem with that is. So, Washington becomes, elevated, and there's a certain, basically conservative style, that doesn't challenge inequality at all. Still see signs of that today. So there's a class consciousness where you are aware of being a member of a social class, where you understand that your experience is the experience of a lot of people, and you become an actor in changing that. So this is what class consciousness means. When Obama talks about social mobility, that's a form of class consciousness. The possibility that you could change your, what we call socioeconomic status. So if we're going to break down socioeconomic status, so SES, socioeconomic status, is the intersection of income, education, occupation, and then relative wealth and power. Wealth is not the same as having lots of money. It's not the same as being rich. Bill Gates can get an audience with the president faster than Jay-Z. Not simply because he has more money. Okay? But because he controls a company that does the software for 90% of the computers on the planet. Okay? Okay? So I'm just saying, wealth is not just riches. It's power and influence. Okay? So class consciousness, you're aware of being a member of a social class. When you understand that your experience is the experience of a lot of people, and you become an actor in changing the experience of those people. Hopefully for the better. Okay? When you become an actor, sometimes that means a leader. Sometimes that means an activist. Sometimes. Okay? Now, just because you're a leader does not mean people will follow you. You might be too early. That nigga's crazy. People will give you that idea. And Gandhi even talked about this. When you first propose the truth, first they ridicule you, kill you, then they attack you, and eventually you win. All right, so a leader simply articulates the private experience of others. Yeah, you said it when I was scared to say it. So then, therefore, the leader could become a target. So that's, okay, you accept that. That's why a good leader basically promotes the same knowledge and disseminates the same knowledge so that there's multiple leaders, so in case the person gets knocked off, there's other people that can replicate what the leader knows. So, Booker T. Washington is looked up to by a certain class of people that identify, yeah, I want to make it in America, and I don't necessarily want to confront America, and I want to get mine. I want to get the trappings to success. And that's okay. To a certain point. It's not my choice. Okay, so as an ex-slave, he's doing pretty good. As a proponent of industrial education, he's saying improve yourself, but don't rock the leaky boat. Pretty much. Don't rock the leaky boat. Has a certain appeal, but not to what Du Bois refers to as the talented tenth. So the talented 10th. So the phrase, so notice where this comes from as a meme first. Originated in 1896 among Northern white liberals, specifically the American Baptist Missionary Home Society, which had the goal of establishing black colleges to train Negro teachers and elites. So notice this connection with education and elite. Who are the elites in American society? Where do they go? Where do they go to school? Could Obama have been in the White House if he'd gone to Howard University? No.
Yale.
Okay? Yale or Harvard, Ivy League. Where is it written in the Constitution that you have to go to an Ivy League school to become president? It ain't. But it's one of those subtext rules in terms of socioeconomic status. You become an elite if you go to an elite school, because elite schools are supposedly hard to get into unless you got money.
Or it's in your family.
Or it's in your family. And your family got money. Right. It's not so much what you know, but it could be who you know, right? Nothing new that you haven't heard before. So the talented 10th, Du Bois used the term talented 10th to describe the likelihood of 1 in 10 black men becoming leaders of their race in the world through methods such as continuing their education, writing books, or becoming directly involved in social change. So one of the things that he's saying, and there's dual meanings, because he's all about dual consciousness, there's dual meanings in this. He's saying all 10 black people could probably make it and had the skills to make it, but only 1 in 10 probably would, because the system was only going to recognize 1 in 10. All 10 probably could make it, but we only going to recognize 1. And guess who we going to recognize? You got to recognize. So, in the reality of black people, we train all our children to become leaders, knowing that the system will screen out all but 1 or 2 of them. In case you didn't know that, that's old school strategy. Which slave do you not free? This is how I got kicked out of my doctoral program.
Which slaves you not free?
Yeah. If you know something is going to liberate people, who do you not give that technology to? No, you give it to all of them, and the smart ones apply it and do it. You cannot predict in advance who that's going to be. So you give it to everybody. Okay? And the ones, and that, so, because I said, I don't believe in control groups. I understand why you do believe in control groups. I understand that. But as a descendant of slaves, which slave do you not free? You give the opportunity to everyone. Let them select whether they will be free. You can't predict that. Don't set it up front. Don't just pick the ones you like because they speak well. Because at the time, I had a shorter haircut. Wearing a coat and a tie. Again, how do you show up to a job? Okay, you dress up, not down. Do you speak Ebonics in a white? No. Okay, you speak the King's English, Queen's English, better than the Queen. You know their history better than the Queen. That makes you part of the talented 10th. You self-select. That's what Du Bois is saying. We give it to everybody. Talented 10th. Everybody's probably got the talent, but y'all only going to accept 1 or 2. 10%. Because you scared of us being excellent. They are, really. So why? All right? Teach them how the screens work so they can get around them. Okay? So all that talk about isms and all that kind of stuff. Teach them, train them to basically go through the barriers so that the barriers are nothing to them. Okay? That's why I spent so much teaching about the screens. Basically, all this stuff used to be secret. Not that we weren't talking about it, but it wasn't being part of the curriculum in the mainstream. Okay? So this is what people that raised me taught me. Pointed to it in books that weren't part of the library. I mean, they were in our libraries, in our bookstores. Okay, so some people you'll hear people talking about Du Bois' talented tenth as being elitist. Okay? And elites are usually chosen from outside the class by the upper class. Impose it on the lower class. Partially he is talking about that, but he's saying we're the ones choosing what the class is. And the class chooses itself. And there will be people that disagree with me. Right? He believed the leaders, the elite, needed a classical liberal education and reach their true destiny as what would be in the 20th century be called public intellectuals. So liberal education and classical education means, yeah, just like in that poem between W.E.B. and Booker T. Booker T says, why do you want to learn chemistry and Greek? Learn to use your hands. And Du Bois says, what if I want to develop my mind? Why shouldn't I? Classic liberal education means whatever is being taught in the traditional canon plus the backstory. Now, the reason I said the whole Trojan horse thing, and we were at Troy, there is the Ethiopus, which is basically the story of Troy talking about Memnon. Ever heard of Memnon?
Agamemnon.
No, not Agamemnon. Memnon.
Agamemnon has something.
Agamemnon was a Greek king. No, Memnon, in the Ethiopus, Memnon led the honorable Ethiopians, which is what the Greeks referred to as Africans. And they described him as black. He was the son of a mortal man and Eos the dawn. And he was described as black. And in classic Greek sculpture, he's depicted as black. He was killed at Troy by Achilles. And his mother appealed to Zeus, said, wait, you were said he was supposed to be immortal, so Zeus brought him back. And then he was said to have led an expedition to what's now Turtle Island. So when you see those Olmec heads,
Is that in Homer?
no, the
I
Ethiopus.
don't remember that in Homer.
No, it's not in Homer. Homer's the Iliad. This is the Ethiopus. Spelled Ethiopus. Okay? An account of the Battle of Troy, but it's mentioning Memnon. So classical liberal education. Not just what they want you to see, Homer and the Iliad, but everything that's there. That's why I made that reference, because, right, I didn't hear about it. What, black people at Troy? Huh? Why would they hide that? Especially if it's already in one of their Greek poems. Why would they not mention that? Huh?
Are those the same guys that told us that Troy didn't really exist?
Yeah, right. Okay. So, men, we shall have only as we make manhood the object of the work of the school's intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of the relation of men to it. This is the curriculum of that higher education which must underlie true life. Now, given when he's speaking, women aren't necessarily being allowed to go to school. So he's using the general male pronoun, and he's actually talking about it, as you've seen from his writing, because he was definitely into having women be in the workplace and be educated. On this foundation, we may build breadwinning, skill of hand, and quickness of brain, with never a fear lest the child and man mistake the means of living for the object of life. That is, you shouldn't let your job dictate your meaning in life. Just put a roof over your head, but fill that roof with meaning. Books, music, art. So, the older Du Bois gets, the more radical he gets. And radicals want total, unequivocal equality. Okay? Because the first use of the radical Republicans, in case that ever appears on a midterm near you, right? Who are they? What do they want?
Forms of mules.
40 acres and a mule. So, in his later life, Du Bois recognized that leadership could arise from many levels, and grassroots efforts were also important to social change. His stepson, David Du Bois, tried to publish those views, writing in 72 of Dr. Du Bois's conviction that it is those who suffered most and have the least to lose that we should look to for our steadfast, dependable, and uncompromising leaders. I want to highlight that. Those who suffered most and have the least to lose that we should look to for our steadfast, dependable, and uncompromising leaders. Let me say something dangerous, just from observation, in case any members of the Gang Symposium Planning Committee are watching. When you have a kid from Hilltop, Tacoma, that's a bank for 3 different drug dealing organizations, $1 million cash transactions in a week that he has to keep separate, and the kid is 13. Okay? But he flunked math from a teacher that probably couldn't balance their checkbook. How many teachers do you know could keep $1 million cash transactions in their head, stash the money, not in a bank, be able to retrieve it, because you know the money better be right? So a kid who starts out like that at 13 is going to be ignored by the system. He's not going to go to Wharton or Harvard or USC or the U of O business school. But he already has a knowledge of finance that a lot of those folks do not have. This is who Du Bois is talking about. The people who have suffered the most and have the least to lose. That when you got nothing to lose. Okay? It's those that we should look to for our steadfast, dependable, and uncompromising leaders, because they have seen the hypocrisy of the system and they're willing to change it. The reason I bring this up in a gang context is that if you have had threats to your survival and you've survived, you become more intelligent. More threats to your survival, the more intelligent. Okay? So it isn't, you shouldn't necessarily be giving advantage to the rich kids. That's predictable because they never had threats to their survival. They're basically coasting on their parents, who would know best how to work the system. People who have developed their intelligence through the language and the experience of the streets. Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you know this kid? Did he get caught up? Or?
Let's say that I was working with people that work with people like that. And as well as working with people like that myself. Where, as was said at the gang symposium, this Blood once said in Portland, well, Hewlett Packard isn't hiring and the Bloods are. Well, okay, so those economic conditions, that reality that he's speaking of, who controls that economy? Who does that? Why ain't Hewlett Packard hiring and the Bloods are? And by the way, the Bloods aren't selling, if whatever they're doing, whether it's dope or girls, because there is that happening, right? Okay? So they ain't necessarily selling to themselves. Okay? And where are they getting it? Right. They ain't speaking Spanish. Right? So there is that certain reality where people are dealing with, I've already spoken about my gang experience, not my gang experience, but clients of mine who basically, right, you're making 10 large a month. In $1982 in Los Angeles, you're a West Side Crip. You got 2 LAPD narco sergeants on the take. You got your own Cadillac Via Ritz paid for cash, no license. You got a $900 a month apartment in San Vicente, which is $3,000 a month today, but $900 then, 90210. So you understand what the economic is and the economic power of the neighborhood. And this, girl is from from Venice. And this was dealing water, that is liquid PCP, as a West Side Crip. This is 6 months before crack hit. So the civic lessons for her is, if your high school counselor told you that you might as well drop out of high school because you're not going to pass and go on welfare, if your parents are junkies and mom didn't come, mom OD'd and 911 didn't come when you called, you have interesting civic lessons, so you have to survive. So, 16-year-old girl who's making $10,000 a month. And I'm supposed to talk her into feeling good about working for Colonel Cluck according to my training. Right? Okay, so how you get her out of that is you use some of the curriculum that you've been getting. Okay, because she said, I wasn't told by anybody how to make it. In fact, all the mainstream people told me I wouldn't make it. So that's why I got into dealing drugs. But if I were going to be given take the opportunity, not just given it, take the opportunity to be successful, I'd be a lawyer or a counselor with kids like me. And you find that with a lot of these gang members. We weren't given the choice. In fact, we were pushed into this. Some of us resisted it. Some of us were able to make it out. But there has been no clear path. So I'm not going to get too dangerous until we get to the 60s. So talented 10th. Tactically, once the grassroots get a taste of power, power corrupts. Unless you keep yourself renewed and strengthened against that corruption. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily have to every time. Power is a lot like cocaine. Say that from personal experience. Makes you think that you're bigger than you are. Gives you the illusion that you're bigger than you are.
Never get enough.
And you never get enough. And you keep using. So, power corrupts unless you keep yourself renewed. So, by understanding the nature of power and effect of it on your ego, that it might not take your spirit or your soul, what profiteth a black man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? You know where that came from? Who said it? Got to lose your soul. You can't lose your soul. You can't lose your connection. And so part of the nature of power, just like I was talking about with the native people, if they basically took their casino per cap and used each frog skin, that is $1 greenback, like it was an eagle feather, we'd have a different conversation. If I were going to call out Jay-Z and 50 Cent, great, you made millions slinging crack. You make millions doing music. Where are your treatment centers? Where are your cooperative corporations to give other people a job or teach other people to become entrepreneurial outside of a street context or to educate themselves? Where are those things? Nice you gave Beyonce a $3 million diamond ring. Great. Nice that you do some philanthropy. But so, Booker T. Washington had power. And when he was ultimately, inevitably betrayed by the leading followers to the Atlanta Compromise, he lost power. Because the Atlanta Compromise, of course, was the wrong thing to do. But those of us who believe that you don't become subservient to oppressors. Yeah, well, we tell you. So, some midterm prep. The Niagara Movement, NAACP, National Association of Colored Women. The White Problem, this might be your book or a different book, but this is James Weldon Johnson, one of the writers of the so-called Negro National Anthem. I will not allow one prejudiced person or 1 million or 100 million to blight my life. I will not let prejudice or any of its attendant humiliations and injustices bear me down to spiritual defeat. My inner life is mine, and I shall defend and maintain its integrity against all the powers of hell. You go, brother. Lift every voice and sing. So, 1910s, a grandfather clause in the Alabama Constitution to eliminate black voters in 1901 upheld 2 years later by the Supreme Court, though in 1915 it'd be struck down in Oklahoma and Maryland. So understand when somebody say grandfathered in, that what they're talking about is racial discrimination originally, even though they might not be talking about that today. Maggie Walker, named president of St. Luke Bank and Trust Company, the first black woman to head a bank. So let me ask you this. How many of you know how to start a bank? Talk about making bank. How many of you know how to start a bank? How do you start a bank? No, a bank. Not a bank account. A bank. Yes, and maybe. Look, yes, you have to have money, but all right, so what's a credit union? What's the difference between a credit union and a bank? Members. Right. And all you have to do is put in money, right? And you are theoretically an equal owner. How much money? The reason I'm asking this question is because it has already been answered in this town. There have been, not in this time period, so I'm not talking until the 1970s, in this town there used to be a credit union called Oregon Urban and Rural. OUR Credit Union was started in part by one of the members of the Black Pioneer families here. The question about how do you start a bank? You know, what Malcolm said in terms of his criticism of Martin Luther King. Why are you petitioning to ride the bus if you're not driving the bus or owning the bus line? That's what Malcolm was talking about. Don't get crumbs from the table. Own the bakery. Don't just buy a roll. Own the bakery. So I'm just throwing it out as, if money is power, okay, how do you start a bank? To get that. And understand how money works. Right? Notice that isn't being taught in your financial classes. Okay? Notice that there is this whole movement. Okay, if student loan debt is now the largest form of debt in the United States. Okay, past all credit card debt and past all home mortgages. Okay, that's a situation to essentially keep you enslaved, in debt, if you don't watch out. What kind of bank makes those kinds of decisions? If students created their own bank, what would that look like? They're going to kill me, I know. Throwing this stuff out.
Professor Griff's still alive.
Yeah, he is. All right, so founding of the NAACP, founding of the National Urban League, through the merger of Committee for Improving the Industrial Condition of Negroes in New York, Committee on Urban Conditions, and the National League for the Protection of Colored Women. So the National Urban League. So it's taking its name from three of those different things. It basically starts in this time too, the 1910s. So in those names, look at what the assumption is, all right? Committee for Improving the Industrial Condition of Negroes, all right? Well, what's wrong with the industrial condition of Negroes? Well, they're working in an industry that means usually factories. Are they getting equal wages? Probably not. Probably getting worked to death. Can they unionize? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, today that issue is, they're talking about a right to work state. Okay? Which means you cannot organize a labor union. I have to say, I'm glad I work at LCC because I get paid better than I would at the U of O. Because of a union. One of the positive things I can say about a union. There are other things that wish were different. Committee on Urban Conditions and the National League for the Protection of Colored Women. Obviously, if there's a National League, colored women need protection from something or someone's. All right. So as we had talked about before, pre-contact tradition, despite pre-contact traditions, despite treaties defining freedmen as citizens, and I'm making this distinction in order to be talking about it, red Indians, quote unquote, exclude black Indians while allowing blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians to remain in the tribe, even though Africans have been citizens of Indian Nation longer, with greater utility to the tribe and the nations they belong to. So they're basically absorbing the memes of racial superiority, white racial superiority, as a virus of the mind. So, Trojan horse, warfare. So, Memnon and the Honorable Africans in the Ethiopius, which is also sometimes spelled AE. That's the source. So other things, capitalism based on European chattel slavery, spiritual gift economy, the idea that connection will set you free, the Aztec phrase, Mexica Tawe. Okay, so in order to diffuse the weapon inside the gift, you have to know it's a weapon, how it works, how it's been used, and how it can be modified. So for example, the ways people can be excluded in Indian country, darky tent, freedmen, the black rolls, and the responses to those. Okay, so you create counter memes to cure mimetic pathogens. All right, we saw this, so let's go here. Ah,
Pleasure. Pleasure.
salud. All right. In studying racism, one of the things I had to look at was, did we talk about original position? Right? So the original position of the naming, who's doing the naming, and what is the position that they're coming from when they name someone. All right? So on the left side, greaser, spick, nigger, sand nigger, prairie nigger, wop, guinea, chink, jap, gook, wetback, illegal. Notice the racial position. Where is it coming from? Who is it targeted towards? So, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants from position of superiority. Okay, so nigger, sand nigger, who's that? Arabs, right? Prairie nigger, Indians. Without official papers, WAP. That's what that means, without official papers, right? Guinea, which is usually applied to Italian, but also because of their connection to Africans, right? Chink, Jap, Gook. Gook was actually a term from Korea, naming themselves. So inside the culture was positive. Wetback, illegal. So on the other side, on those going back, gringo, güero, gaijin, guaylo, haole, wasishu, ofe, obruni, crusader, goyim, shiksa, the man, Mr. Charlie, Miss Anne. So is the position coming from racial superiority? No. Okay, so for example, if you look at haole, it's Hawaiian. Aloha means I greet you from the deepest part of my heart breath. Ha is breath. Right? So ancient Polynesians greet each other forehead to forehead, breathing the breath. Right? Missionaries greeted you with, where did this come from? Europe, yes. Checking to see if you had a dirk. A dirk is a stiletto. Okay? Like a dagger. Long, thin dagger. You could conceal it up your sleeve. So we're originally shaking hands like so. Checking you for weapons with the right hand. And the reason it's the right hand is because this is the hand that you're supposed to have the weapon in. So if you've noticed, evil guys, I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but whatever. Evil guys basically coming with a dirk with their left hand to stab you, because they still could do that. The left hand is the sinister hand. Right? So the missionaries are greeting you by checking you for weapons. The Hawaiians are greeting you, sharing the breath. Haole means without breath. Those who greet us without breath. So it's not a position of racial superiority. It's like, what's up with these people? They don't trust us? Wasishu. The first people that the Lakota met were French trappers and traders. And they were starving. And so they were brought into camp, and the warriors wanted to kill them because they thought they had some kind of disease because their skins were pale. And this was evidence, and the women said, no, they're people. They're hungry. Feed them. So there's a code, basically, where when you bring in a kill that you give pregnant women and elders the first bite, and you also give them the fat because the fat has nutrients. Well, apparently these trappers didn't get the memo, and they just fell on the carcass and started gobbling, and it became the name Chwasishu, eats the fat. Okay, again, a cultural faux pas, not racial superiority. Ofe is a Wolof word which means enemy. It's used mostly in the 60s when basically the Black Power movement, referring to enemy, referring to white people, Ofe. Obruni, foreigners, tourists. This is another African word which can also be applied to African Americans because, yeah, we may be black, but you American. Crusader, terms used by Arabs against usually white people, basically with a historical context. Goyim, basically a term used by Jews to describe non-Jews. Generically, Shiksa is a female non-Jew. The Man, Mr. Charlie, and Miss Ann, basically all names for white people by African Americans. So just contrasting and comparing ethnic slurs and ethnic naming. So awareness of colorism, as we talked about with colorism, how this plays out. In intersectionality. Under racism, another one is skin privilege or unprivileged. You have an automatic advantage that others do not because of their different characteristic. So where disability and color intersect. So there's a reference for that. So deaf versus hearing. So oralism is speech and lip reading, which is promoted by Alexander Graham Bell, versus sign language, considered the natural language of the deaf by the deaf. In fact, within deaf culture, there is no race. You are hearing or you're deaf. And deaf could be any race. So there is no race. Their major discriminator is by the hearing, because it's the hearing that are setting the rules. Right? So Alexander Graham Bell in some deaf circles is considered like Hitler, basically because of his racism. Thanks. Both Hitler and Bell believed in eugenics. Bell didn't want the deaf to have children together because they might create a race of deaf people. Data didn't support that conclusion. His central interest in his life was education for deaf children, or that he was one of the strongest proponents of oralism, that is, speaking and lip reading in the United States. So his mother was hard of hearing, and once she had enough hearing to use an ear-tobe for one-on-one conversations, he used the British two-handed manual alphabet to communicate with her. So then he wrote a number of papers. Those who believe as I do that the production of a defective race of human beings would be a great calamity to the world will examine carefully the causes that lead to the intermarriage of the deaf with the object of applying a remedy. And that remedy would be sterilization. All right, so we ain't meeting Monday. It's President's Day. Here is the midterm. It will be available online in about half an hour. You have 1 week to complete it. Complete it on your own. Don't forget to put your name and L number on the paper. Basic stuff. See you in 168 hours.
Can I give you this?
Yes. Are you mesmerized? You're mesmerized.
I've been used to